Welcome back to the Table Rush Talk Show, where we dive deep into the world of entrepreneurship, marketing, and personal growth. I'm your host, Mischa Zvegensov, and today's guest is Bill Overton, a high performing executive turned mental health advocate who's on a mission to rewrite the rules of leadership. After facing burnout and high functioning depression head on, Bill now speaks truth to power about what it really takes to create sustainable success from the boardroom to the soul. Get ready to explore the intersection of leadership, vulnerability, and balance with wisdom that's as practical as it is spiritual. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mischa. Wow, that was a great intro.
Thank you very much. I worked hard to perfect it.
I hope I can live up to that introduction in the next hour.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with what you do now. But more than that, tell us what transformation you're really here to create. What's the deeper shift you're helping people make through your work and your message?
Well, these days for a living, I manage a community on a section of land, that's 640 acres of land in Palm Desert, California, 600 plus homes of very high powered, wealthy people that come here to get away from the ups and downs and the rat race of the real world, to play golf and to live in a resort type community. My service, my HOA, it is what it is, but I'm actually managing a small town. We provide security, landscape maintenance, and a governance process, for rules and enforcement, to protect their property values and enhance their quality of life. It's herding some really big cats. And one of the interesting things about this job is that I'm responsible for leading people that far outrank me in the game of life. If you measure that financially, they're all very powerful, very smart, but very new to this sort of governmental process. HOA management is really grassroots government at ground level, and herding the boards and the committees, letting things that I think need to get done be their idea is the art of what I do, and I've done for about 35, 40 years.
That is amazing. Boy, we could go deep on that. I love the way you described you're managing a small town, and I love the picture that of people that are a lot more successful than you are. So managing that delicate balance of egos and letting people think they're coming up with the decisions and this and that, and I don't know if placating is the right word, but
Well,
really,
and protecting them and managing liability and, a great number of things. Facilitating doesn't really do it justice. I'm responsible for getting things done, but I also want good people on my boards and committees that feel like they're making a difference, but they don't have to work 40 hours a week doing it. I try to make it easy for them. And, what I'm really striving for is for somebody to come into my office and say, what do you do all day? Because that means that the work is invisible. And, it's kind of like working for the water department or the sewage treatment department. Nobody really thinks about you until it doesn't work. And when it works, you're invisible. Like a good umpire in a baseball game is invisible. If you're paying attention to the umpire, it's not a good sign for the game.
yeah. Uh, we're good friends. We've been good friends for a long time. I know that you have an opportunity to lead by example in that community. You have an opportunity to be patient, to, I don't know, apply some of the things we're going to talk about in chilling out, or I don't, my words, not yours, but you want to go 30 seconds or a couple minutes on that about,
Well, I used to be a power manager, even though I focused on facilitation and bringing people together. I just put my head down, made to-do list, bulled my way through an awful lot of things. And bigger jobs. I was always the guy that took on the biggest, most impossible community and was tasked with turning it around and smoothing things out. And I finally took a Mount Everest type job, and that's Mount Everest at sunset behind me. $15 million annual budget, 150 employees, golf, tennis, equestrian, you name it, in a community that was as fractured as Washington and Congress is right now. And there were ethical issues that I really couldn't get my arms around, and truth issues and legal issues and people fighting all the time. And in addition to just running the day-to-day business, they wanted 10 major projects, infrastructure type stuff done. And, I worked myself absolutely into the ground, 80-hour weeks, trying to get everything done, trying to appease everybody and do it the right way, I thought. And I worked myself into a burnout situation. And it came on fairly quickly, but I gained a bunch of weight. I was sweating all the time. I couldn't sleep. I was grumpy. And finally, something happened where I just could not go one step further ethically. And I learned later, physically and emotionally. And, I took, I thankfully, I went to the doctor, and it was the last appointment the guy had in the day. And he took about an hour, general practitioner, and started asking me a bunch of questions. Have you gained weight? Have you lost interest in your hobbies? Are you grumpy? Are you sweating all the time? Are you thinking about suicide? And he asked me about suicide maybe 4 times. And finally I said, well, why do you keep asking me about it? He goes, well, one, you have a suicide in your immediate family. My mother committed suicide long ago. Secondly, you're exhibiting all the signs of high functioning depression. And we really worry about you guys because you're the guys that are getting things done one day and go out and blow your brains out the next day. If you think of Anthony Bourdain, who a few years ago, a hugely successful celebrity with TV shows and everything, just went off and killed himself. Robin Williams. There are a myriad of athletes, executives, entertainers, newscasters that this happens to. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm not depressed. I don't lay in bed all day and pull a blanket over my head. He said, no, we don't worry about those guys as much because they procrastinate committing suicide. And I had my wife with me, which was something I never do at a doctor's appointment. I advise you to never bring your wife to the doctor with you because you can't sugarcoat what the doctor tells you when you get home. And he said, if you hadn't answered that suicide question properly, I would have put you on a 72-hour cycle. And I said, oh, he said, I said, well, I just want to take a week off and go back and reconsider my options. He said, sir, you're going to be on FMLA. You're going to use the whole 4 months. You're never going back to that job. And you're on a 5-year odyssey minimum to learn about mental health, to get some psychiatric medicinal help, to get some counseling help, to lower stress in your life, and to kind of get your arms around mental wellness so that you can live a happier, more balanced life. I'm pretty sure you've never lived a happy, balanced life. You've had ups and downs that are huge. And, basically, Mischa, I had a nervous breakdown and I was diagnosed with a mental illness. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me in the sense that it got my attention and it set me on a course of studying and trying to understand mental health and mental wellness in general and in the workplace. And I've become, fairly obsessed with it. Turns out there's huge studies out there conducted by Gallup and Deloitte and Touche. It's actually not Deloitte and Touche, it's just Deloitte. But I had to learn a different way to live, and I had to learn a different way to manage my life and my life in the workplace.
Mm. FMLA, is that the Family Marriage and Leave Act?
Family Medical Leave Act, I
Act.
think it is. What it does is protect employees from being fired. So you claim FMLA, you file a form, and they can't even talk to you for 4 months or until the doctor releases you. And, that's exactly what I needed. I had a reporter call me my first day of FMLA at 8 a.m. in the morning on my cell phone looking for comments of why I was out of the office, trying to stir up trouble.
Mhm.
I lived in the community that I managed, which in retrospect, I don't think was a very good decision, but I had people knocking on my door. It was very difficult for a type AAA person like myself that was all wound up with 60 to 80-hour weeks and getting things done. It was exceptionally difficult to unplug.
Mhm. Is that you wrote a piece called I Was Jack, and in that you talk about how you hit that, or you hit the wall, the weight of stress, anxiety, and what you call high performing depression. Is that about this moment you're describing
Yes.
where? Yeah.
And I was trying to make a joke about Fight Club. If you remember in the movie Fight Club, I am Jack's spleen. I am Jack's, what at heart. So I was trying to, and the editor was like, Bill, no one's going to get that. It was like my kids. I try to do all these movie references for my kids. They're like, Dad, I didn't see that movie. I don't care. But that's what it was referencing. And yeah, I was trying to describe. I mean, I start my presentations like, I'm Bill and I have a mental illness
Mm,
because I'm trying to lower the stigma on talking about this in the workplace.
mm,
And, guys, I'll say, guys, I had a nervous breakdown. I mean, they don't call it that anymore. But, I was a rugby player, run through brick wall guy, give the impossible job guy. And I had a nervous breakdown. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. And
mm.
what was interesting about it, Misha, is I thought I was committing career suicide with that article. It was published in a national management magazine that reaches 50,000 members. So imagine you're a manager, unemployed, and you write an article like that. You're going to be interviewing for jobs with CEOs. I'm like, am I committing career suicide? And I really thought I was alone. And what I found was this happens to a lot of people. Statistically, something like a third of the United States is dealing with depression related issues right now at any given time, a third. And if you want to talk statistics, I mean, I mentioned Deloitte and Gallup. This is such a big deal. They're studying the effect of depression in the workplace. And Gallup estimates $9 trillion lost of global domestic product annually due to anxiety, depression, and underperforming in the workplace. So if you can imagine, and this is what Gallup posits, if you can imagine having $9 trillion of better performance to implement in solving the world's problems, imagine what you could produce.
Mm.
They estimate that 59% of the workplace right now is quiet quitting. That means showing up, doing the minimum. Another 20% are loud quitting, being disruptors in the workplace. So you add those two numbers together, that's 80%. Only 20 to 23% of employees are actively engaged with their employers. I mean, really buying the concept, invested in the mission, et cetera. And this statistically has gone up over the last 12 years from about 30% saying they're stressed out daily at work to 44% of employees surveyed saying that they're stressed out at work. So we're living a stressed out existence right now. And you add on top of it what's going on politically, what's going on with, stuff in Gaza and, all around the world. We live in a very chaotic, stressed out time.
Sprinkle some AI in there.
Well, and it's impacting our performance. It's impacting our wellness. There's a huge human cost to this. Being unhappy, not being present for one's spouse or one's children, not being a constructive, empathetic leader, not just not being happy, worrying all the time, heart disease, high blood pressure, all these things are enhanced by stress. But there's a huge, as I just said, financial cost. And what I think employers need to realize, and some are beginning to realize, that if they practice wellness and constructive culture in the workplace, they will improve their bottom line. And one of the ways is with performance, as we just outlined in the Gallup study. But just imagine, like in my position, I've been doing this 35, 40 years. Won awards on some team projects. I get published, all kinds of stuff. How much money have my employers spent over the years with training, with continuing education, with all kinds of stuff? So if I got burned out tomorrow and said, F it, I'm out of here, they got to go to a recruit. They got to pay a recruit. They have to onboard me. They have to train me on their company's practices and culture. And if I'm a newer manager, they got to pay for me to go through all those classes and to go to all those conferences. And if the client is pissed because I left, they might lose the client. So there's a huge financial cost to this in many, many ways. And I think employers and managers need to understand that. Now, this doesn't just affect the rank and file, Mischa. It affects executives too. 36% of executives polled in the Deloitte study are exhausted. 41% are stressed. 40% are overwhelmed. 30% are lonely, and 26% are depressed. That's in the executive suite. And 50% are angling for a less stressful job, to make a change to have less stress. It's
That's
crazy.
incredible. It's crazy.
This is what we're trying to hold together with our current societal mental health culture and our current work cultures in the United States and around the world. It isn't just a United States problem.
Mm. Let's talk about the people who need to hear your message the most. Who do you speak for? Who do you serve when you share your story?
Well, I say this to everybody, and I say this to you right now, that somebody on this podcast right now is in crisis. Somebody that watches this is in crisis right now and doesn't even know it. When I give talks, and I've given breakout sessions at executive retreats and at national conferences, there's a line of people waiting to talk to me going, man, I'm exactly where you were. What do I do? I'm about to lose it. I'm going to go talk to my wife about making a change. So mostly I'm advocating for people like myself that are high performing folks. I don't want anybody to commit suicide. My mother committed suicide. My family's dealt with that for 50 years. Actually, the 50th anniversary of her suicide is tomorrow. And I've learned in working with people that by helping them, it helps me kind of reimagine my grief in that, for a while in my life, I was mad about it. Now it's like, Mom, I understand. And it allows me, like when you go to a wedding and you feel the love in a wedding, it helps you reconnect with your wife, that love you felt when you got married. These situations allow me to reconnect with my grief in a more constructive way and to help other people. I would rather have a friend call me in misery at 3 a.m. and talk to him all night long than go to his funeral 2 weeks later. So mostly I'm advocating for people like myself that have this sort of high performing depression that are about to blow up or that are somewhere on the spectrum and might need to address this. Secondly, I want anybody that has depression or anxiety to realize there should be no stigma on this at all, and they just need to talk to somebody. My main mission my secondary mission after number one is to lower the stigma on this for individuals and in the workplace. kind of my third mission is to educate executives, especially boomers. In these studies, they find that Gen Z managers do a much better job of understanding this, of implementing policies for their employees and taking care of their own mental health than boomers do. So just hypothecate for a minute. If you're a boomer that runs a company the old John Wayne way, and you're losing employees to Gen Z managers that get the bigger wellness picture and are implementing that, your bottom line is going to be hurt. You're going to be less profitable. The Gen Z managed company is going to hire and keep people and be more profitable. The Darwinian economic survival of the fittest is going to eventually take out the boomer managed companies anyway. The younger employees want this. And I've gone from thinking that they don't have a bad work ethic to thinking they might be right, that we need to change our work ethic and our wellness culture in all these companies. So those are kind of my three goals, Mischa. Mostly what I find, and you know this, when you speak to people from the heart about what happened to you, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, people respond. And, you know, I share simple principles. I shared one of those articles about my 10 go-to things: gratitude, acceptance, service. These are basic spiritual principles that are in all religions. Even Buddhism, which isn't a religion, but a philosophy, all these principles are in every spiritual practice. And you don't have to believe in any one particular God or religion to benefit from these spiritual practices. And I've written 3 or 4 articles and an introduction that's in a book that I put together with other managers telling their stories so that our fellows out in the world in this industry of community management can read it and have a practical guide to understanding their own mental wellness and have some tips to improve their mental health and mental wellness along the way.
We'll be sure to put that link for the book into the show notes. And congratulations on your new book, by the way, Managing Mental Health, a guide to building resilience and finding balance in community associations. I had a question I was going to ask you. You sort of answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. Can you share what inspired you to contribute to this project and what you hope readers will take away from it?
Well, I love writing. First of all, it was a 2-year herding cats project, because who wants to bare their soul about their own meltdown or whatever it was and how they recovered from it? So there was an incredible amount of follow-up and empathy. And I'm a pest. When I get on something, I'm a pest. And I followed up with people for 2 years to get that done. You know, I love writing and I love sharing my experience, strength, and hope with other people. And I led a movement in our industry 30 years ago about building community. And if you know, want to know what I'm talking about, I mean, coffee is a pretty basic worldwide commodity, and Starbucks does it with a whole lot of flair and comfort and little danishes. I'm a Starbucks junkie. Starbucks builds community around a really basic commodity. So 25 or 30 years ago, I thought we could do the same thing in community management and not just enforce rules and collect dues, but actually be like the Chamber of Commerce, be customer service organizations. And I got a lot of gratification out of adult education, writings. 3 books now have been published around that were all group projects where I recruited other managers and myself to make it more broad. And, you know, when I wrote that first article, I Am Jack's Brain, it hit at exactly the right time when COVID had struck, mental health was a big deal. There were 1 or 2 other people leading around wellness, mostly physical wellness in our industry, because there's drinking issues and weight issues and all kinds of stuff. And companies were starting to become aware of how expensive this is. My company is $1 billion plus international company. Our third highest insurance costs is mental health stuff. Number one is heart disease. Number two is high blood pressure. Number three is mental health. And guess what? See number one and number two, right? So I wrote that article and everybody just was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Bill, you need to present at conference. So I did a breakout session at conference with a lot of the stuff I've researched. Oh my God, you need to come to the executive conference. So now I'm on fire and that creative part of your brain gets rolling. I know you know what I'm talking about. And it's like, hey, we should write a class about this. And everybody said, great idea. I drafted 3 or 4 other people, presidents and past presidents of my organization. We wrote the class together. 5 presidents in the room with me, presidents of the organization presenting a mental wellness class. Sold out right away. They recorded it. They're about to debut that so that people can take it remotely. And then I said, this is great. Let's do it. And everybody's excited and wanting to get on the bandwagon. So I attracted, I think, 18 other authors, plus myself. Someone else dragged in another author. And the follow-up. Bill, I don't know if my story is any good. I don't know if it's valid. I said, guys, write from the heart and I will help you. And you know what? In my prior books, the editing was extremely tedious and difficult and time consuming and huge. I had to rewrite a bunch of pieces. These were all when a person got to where they wrote from the heart, 0 editing. Every story that came in was powerful. And everybody's like, I don't think my story's any good. And I'm like, man, you nailed it. And what ended up happening, and I'm getting a little emotional, what ended up happening was this collage of stories from so many perspectives. Like if I wrote the whole book, you'd get Bill's perspective. And by the end of it, you'd be, all right, whatever, that's Bill's perspective. This is such a collage of people that risked, and opened their heart and risked that vulnerability that it's just a powerful thing. And, we're getting feedback already. It's selling like crazy. They're going to do a second printing, I think, already. And it's not that I'm a genius or that we're geniuses. It's that we're sharing from the heart about a topic that we've experienced and walked through that almost everybody in the workplace can relate to. The timing is so perfect and it's so personal. And you know how it is when someone shares from a vulnerable place, their realness, not telling anybody what to do, just here's how it is. I fell down and I got up and here's how. It just, I don't know what I'm going to do next. If anything, I don't really care. As far as I'm concerned, after 40 years of management, adult education, and teaching classes on stuff like finance, rules enforcement, governance, this is what it's really all about.
Mm. You penned both the foreword and a chapter titled Recognizing and Managing Depression. What personal experiences influenced your contributions to those sections?
Well, in retrospect, pretty clear to me, once I was diagnosed, a lot of life moments made a lot of sense for me. If you draw a sinusoidal curve of Bill's life, it's like that. Huge ups, triumphs, incredible downs that lasted years at times. Some of my wounds or problems were caused by others or by the economy. Some were self-inflicted, but still huge ups and downs. The perspective I try to take now with meds, with counseling, with meditation, with helping others, with physical activity, with all the things you do to take care of yourself as a human being that I neglect it when I'm in these high performing hyper moments, the sinusoidal curve is more level. There's still ups and downs, but that's what I try to communicate in these stories, in these essays. Um, the stuff I'm talking about as far as the solutions, nothing new, man. Take walks, take breaks, hug your wife, breathe, eat well, drink a lot of water, meditate, rinse, wash, repeat. Well, we get so damn busy, Mischa. We get so damn busy in our lives. And I will say this. I was raised by a very rough John Wayne PhD Olympic athlete father and a super brilliant PhD depressed, withdrawn mother who committed suicide. Both were alcoholics. And I think it's in my blood. I've had problems with alcohol and addiction in the past. I'm sober now, thank God. Um, but man, I always wanted to be the Mount Everest guy. I wanted to be better than my father, tougher than my father. I wanted to do more than my father. And I actually, at one time when it was a fad, thought, they can do it. I can climb Mount Everest. I'm going to do that someday. And what I realized after my bottom, I don't call it a breakdown, I call it a bottom. What I realized is I'm not bulletproof. I still have the ego thinking I am bulletproof, but that was a lie that tried to get me killed for my whole life. And I keep Mount Everest in my office, and I have it as a background to remind me that every dead body on Mount Everest was once a highly motivated individual like me. Now, do I want to be mentally well, happy, and healthy, or do I want to be dead on Mount Everest?
Take your path. It's so good. Okay. The book features your concept, and you've spoken to this a little bit, but the book features your concept of 10 everyday superpowers. Could you delve into how these practices can aid professionals in high stress environments?
I can. Give me a second to pull it up. Can you still see me?
I can.
I have a tendency to screw these things up. I'm an analog man in a digital age. So I live a much more connected, balanced life right now than I ever have. I try to meditate every day. I'm involved in fellowship stuff that gives me an opportunity to learn and be of service. I try to walk and exercise and eat right and drink a lot of water and do all those things. So, it used to be I'd go on a 2-week vacation and it would take me 13 of the 14 days to unwind. And then I'd be stressed out about going back to work. I'm a lot less wound up these days going into vacation. So I'm on vacation in Aruba. My wife's family's happy spot is this beautiful place on Eagle Beach across the little bay there, from Venezuela. You can see it sort of on a clear day. The locals are super nice. They've been going to this place for like 20 years, sort of a hotel apartment timeshare type thing with the most beautiful beach you've ever seen, palm frond umbrellas. And I'm out there on the beach one day and I said, I wonder if I can come up with 10 things, kind of like the 10 things you need to do to be successful, or the Covey 7 steps of highly effective people. I'm just sitting there on the beach and I realized that, what we're talking about is a paradigm shift for leadership and for self-management. Instead of profitability as the main process, let's look at productivity by lowering, instead of cracking the whip, let's use the carrot. Let's create a better environment. Let's lower stress and depression. So how do I do that? How can we do that? And remember, in this moment, I'm writing for an obsessed, type AAA CEO that is pounding his bottom line. And he's looking at offshoring AI, all kinds of crazy stuff to manage the bottom line. And I want to approach it from a different angle. So number one is gratitude. And, when I start talking to people about this initially, they're like, come on, what are you talking about? And, it's a really simple principle. If you're grateful, you have a better outlook on life. And, I encourage these guys to start by making a simple gratitude list. You can start simply. Give me 5 things you're grateful for. Eventually, if you really get into this, you can write pages and pages of things you're grateful. And once you have an attitude of gratitude, to be trite, in your heart, you are able to share that with other people. The second principle is acceptance. And this is a basic spiritual principle in every spiritual practice that's ever been written or shared around the world, that I can't control and fix everything. Like this morning, I had a bunch of angry customers. I can't fix them. I have to accept them. Ma'am, I accept you're angry, but let's talk about this. And a couple of them had a misconception, so I needed to educate them, but in a way that they didn't feel manipulated. By accepting them, I didn't resist them, and I wasn't stuck anymore. Third principle is forgiveness. A lot of people are running around with resentments and don't realize it. And to me, forgiveness is one of the most amazing superpowers of all. Now, I don't have to forget, but I need to forgive to move on. And if I'm holding a ton of anxiety inside myself because I'm not accepting things, or, we talked about my mother's suicide. It took me a really long time to accept and forgive my mother's suicide. And that caused me a lot of trouble. It affected relationships. It affected how I approached the day. But by accepting and forgiving, I can be free of that. And there's a million examples of this in everyday life. Positive intentions. Mindset matters. If I have a positive intention that I'm okay, I'm going to be okay, the world's going to be okay. And, I really need to just try to be positive and influence the people around me. Again, you're radiating a positive presence. This isn't a positive attitude of like cracking a whip and goal setting. This is more of a positive attitude of just focusing on what I can do right now and how I can help people right this minute. Number 5 is service. I've long really been touched by an Albert Schweitzer quote. I talked about building community in my industry a few minutes ago. This quote has always resonated for me. I do not know what your destiny will be, but the one thing I know, only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. Now, this attitude of service is actually a management philosophy. There's all kinds of books and writings. I think there's even an institute on servant leadership. Like, how can I serve my employees like they're customers of mine? How can I help them? Not just at work, but how can I help them have a positive environment at work? How can I help them be all they can be with classes and education and just support? And I'm not talking just either outside of work by charitable donations. I think Americans have sort of slipped into a philosophy that if they're donating money to charity, they're doing their part. How about volunteering at a food bank or Habitat for Humanity or Little League? There's all kinds of places that need volunteers. How about mentoring young people? If it's in business, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or Rotary or whatever, are you mentoring somebody? Like, I've had mentors in my life. I've got to share that with other people. Number 6 that I recommended is just to have fun. Mischa, I know you're a fun loving person and you try to bring fun into everything you do. If you're having fun, and I'm not talking throwing a football around the office or whatever, but just having fun, again, these things change the energy that you bring to life and they rub off on other people. If you're angry all the time and stressed out all the time, I always ask, raise your hand if you've ever had an angry, demanding boss. Everybody in the audience raises their hand. If you have a fun boss, a boss you're not scared of, that you can approach, you can ask for help. I mean, all these things add on to one another. Starbucks is a great example of mine. If you want another example, look up the Savannah Bananas baseball team on the internet. This guy bought a minor league baseball team called the Savannah Bananas, and he wears yellow suits and hats all the time. And he has turned baseball upside down. He sort of made it like a traveling Harlem Globetrotters show. And they are on tour now in major league ballparks, and they sell out 50,000 seat stadiums because they're putting on a show and they're having a really good time. Now, baseball is about the most systemic, historical thing of all the sports. I mean, they got stats going back to the 1800s and legends and all this stuff. And here this guy turned the Savannah Bananas on its head and reinvented what baseball can be from an entertainment perspective. Bill Veeck did that with the Chicago White Sox back in the 40s and 50s. This guy has taken it to another level. I really, if you want to get a grip on what I'm talking about as far as having fun in the office, just check that out. Cirque du Soleil is another incredible example of turning an industry on its head. The traveling circus was dead as an industry in the United States of America. And somebody figured out they could get all these ballet and gymnastics type people together and they could reimagine what a circus is like and travel or be stationed in Las Vegas. And if you've ever gone to Cirque du Soleil, you almost have to go 2 or 3 times to take it all in. They did it and they had fun doing it and they reimagined an entire industry. We are capable of reimagining our workplaces. Number 7 is asking for help. I was raised that that's a weakness. And what I found now is that when I ask for help, it honors the other person. It brings more minds and more energy and more man hours to the problem. When I've had some mental health issues at work, I asked for some help and got some help and support. It's not something I would have done in the past. Number 8 is meditation. I had to learn how to meditate. You and I have spent a lot of time together on this, Mischa, and I learned how to do it in yoga classes. I always thought meditation was a silly hippie thing. And what I've really learned now is that it helps me incredibly. I've sat in the past for up to an hour at a time meditating. Once you find that place, I now can reach that place in just 2 or 3 breaths. But I recommend meditation highly. And remember, I'm recommending this to type AAA guys that think they're Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry, and only because I was once one of them, can I get through at times. So, this all sounds like airy-fairy stuff, but for me now, it's just really basic suggestions. Calmer mind, quieter soul, less stress, lower blood pressure, a deeper understanding of myself and others. And by the way, more clear thinking. I'm a better manager, better person when I meditate. Finally, the last 2 are balance. This is something that everybody has to figure out for themselves, but I work fewer hours. I have a routine. with my dog walk in the morning and with my wife in the evening, and how I eat and how I meditate and things like that. Much more in balance. I work 40 hours a week now. And number 10 is rinse, wash, repeat. This has to become a routine. And, if anybody, has ever, let's use golf as an example. If you want to change your golf swing after having played golf for 20 years, it's really hard to do. You have to take lessons. You have to go to the driving range. You have to practice some basic drills, and you have to do it over and over and over again until it becomes habit. Baseball players, professional baseball players, still take infield and batting practice every day. 35-year-old guy's been doing it since he was 5 years old. He's a millionaire. Maybe he's leading the league in hitting. He still takes batting practice and infield or outfield every single day. Likewise, these principles have to become fundamentals. And when I'm staying on my platform, I get so much done in 40 hours and done well. I work much more efficiently, and I have more empathy, and I'm more available to my wife, to my children, to the people around me. I was always the get things done dad, and that's cool. I'm a much better father and husband now just because I have more empathy and I'm more available. Those things sound like a lot to somebody that's not doing any of them. But once they become habit, you don't have to think about it. It just happens. And the result is less stress. My heart's better. All my numbers on my blood test are, that of a 13-year-old triathlete, and I'm a 23-year-old triathlete. I'm not even hyper exercising anymore. It becomes a habit, and the payoff is good here, and in the rest of your body.
So good. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So many nuggets in there.
I went on a long time. I apologize about that.
No, it's all good, I think. I think that big takeaway from all that, being a one-time, uh, let's say I'm a recovering A type with still have some A type sharp edges. But hearing a lot of that when I'm in my pull myself up from my bootstraps kind of a mode.
Suck it up, Mischa.
Yeah. A lot of that can trigger contempt or trigger resistance or trigger, resentment, or
What a great word.
Yeah.
Trigger.
Yeah.
What a great word. So important.
Yeah, so important. You said earlier, and I was struck by it, that depression doesn't always look like despair. Sometimes it looks like performance. What are the biggest myths, stigmas, or internal objections that keep leaders from getting help or admitting something's off?
First, the other type of depression is much easier to observe, right? You're in bed, you're sad, you're crying. This is different. I mean, I was driven, and I didn't even know by what, just the anxiety and the drive, right? And it got pointed in athletics for a long time. It got pointed in self-destructive habits for a long time. And then once I got into business, it got pointed into business for a long time. And no one would have even guessed. They just thought I was hyper and intense and I got shit done. Part of the problem is we're using what's broken to try and figure out what's wrong with us. Our brain, right? Our metabolism. And man, I've been in business counseling and marriage counseling, and I've done all the Myers-Briggs tests and other tests, and no one even ever had a thought that I had a mental illness because this is hidden in there. You know, a lot of divorces are because people are driven and they're not connecting, or just they're not connecting. And, you see a lot of very wealthy, high performing people that end up getting divorced, and they have that male midlife crisis of the Ferrari. I mean, how many times have we seen CEOs forced out for an inappropriate relationship with a female subordinate that they connected with? Even though there's a power discrepancy, that CEO needed to be heard, accepted, loved, appreciated at some level. And that was what he sought. I'm sure he didn't intend to get fired. I'm sure he didn't intend to do something inappropriate. He was just looking for some comfort to that edge and anxiety that's driving him inside. The amount of pressure we heap on CEOs and executives in the C-suite is just off the chart. And this is cultural, top to bottom. So it gets back, I think, in large part to, can we change the culture of the workplace? I mean, if you look at Wall Street, we're just driven by performance and by, stockholder, returns. And that's all well and good. But I think I read somewhere in Sapiens, it's a book I know you like, that 2 or 3 hedge funds own majority shares in 70% of the Fortune 500. So little guys like us and executives in these companies are, part of a really huge machine. And, the matrix comes to mind. You can either let the machine grind you up, or you can take the red pill and wake up and pay attention. And, I have found CEOs not necessarily resistant to what I've had to say. I'd say about a third of them are very open to what I'd have to say. And I'd say about 2/3 are just worried about other things that I can't get through the noise yet. That's why I talk a lot about this is affecting your bottom line right now, whether you know it and admit it or not. So you're old enough to remember the old Fram oil filter commercial, you can pay me now or you can pay me later.
So good.
That's kind of how I'm looking at it, Mischa. And you know what, man? I'm in the 4th quarter. I'm 68. I'm only going to work a couple more years. I'm only going to do these talks, these writings for a couple more years. I thank God that I had an opportunity to learn and change, better late than never. This has been a 10-year odyssey for me to where I am today. I wish I'd learned it at 28, not 58, but better late than never. When I share these things in the book and in the talks, it's like, I want you guys to benefit from my experience. Make some changes now. One of the ironies, I've read this and I've seen it myself. If you kill yourself at work, HR will clean out your desk and they'll have a new person in that seat in no time. The only people that are going to remember that you worked 80 or 90 hours a week 10 years from now are your kids. And, I used to think that work ethic was noble. And I don't want to work myself to death. Go read The Jungle. Go read the book, The Jungle, about immigrants and industry in the 1920s, before unions, before paid holidays, before paid vacation. Working yourself to death isn't just a metaphor. It was a real thing long ago. And to some degree, even though we're not, like, many of us, even executives, aren't in a dangerous workplace situation where you could die on the spot with heavy machinery or something. It's a subtle work yourself to death thing. And I just don't want to play that game anymore. I've made it very clear to my employer, there's a limit. There's a limit to how much abuse and stress I'm willing to take. And they're cool with that.
I love that. I mean, I don't love that we get stressed out, but I love that your company leadership has said, yeah, okay, l- you know, yeah, we're willing to let you live this wellness lifestyle. Call it what you will. I'm probably butchering it, but and
My
they,
first presentation, Misha,
yeah.
and one contributor to my book is the executive vice president in charge of all human resources of the $1 billion+ company I work for right now. So this is from the director of human resources, something like 15,000 employees. That's the level of commitment our director of HR has towards improving wellness in the workplace. So it can happen. There are companies out there that have directors of wellness, vice presidents of wellness in the workplace. Businesses are starting to catch on to this slowly but surely. So the real the real message for individuals is take care of yourself, pay attention, take care of yourself, get help. To companies, it's take care of your employees in a different way.
Mm.
More pay and vacation don't solve burnout. Take care of them in a different way. And you'll be a good human being, but it'll still impact your bottom line constructively.
Check this out. My girlfriend Katie works for a company, and you can take as much vacation time as you want and as much days off as you want. They don't track it. There's not, you have 2 weeks or 20 days or whatever it is, which is incredible. Interestingly, they've found that companies that do that, and this is reverse of what we would think, people are taking less days off, even though they can take more. It's just an interesting thing. But I encourage
It's
her, take the
amazing.
time. Yeah, go ahead.
It's amazing. You know, the I had a situation a few years ago. I had AFib really bad. It was a month long with my heart rate around 170. I was beaten up, worn down, and a customer threatened me. And he was, wound up enough that you didn't know if it was going to be one of these shoot the office up kind of situations or if he was just blowing off steam. So I wrote him an email, setting him straight. I reported him to HR. I wrote my board. I wrote my management company boss. I told them everything that was going on. And I said, listen, right now, this minute, I need help. And they all jumped in, helped get the ball rolling. The guy sued us. They refused to settle. He actually filed a lawsuit against me for harassment. We were trying to get him to do some things he had to do in the community. He filed a preemptive lawsuit, asked for $5 million. My board was so mad that when the insurance company said, well, we want to settle for $50,000. And if you don't settle, you have to pay part of the legal fees going forward. My board said, we're not giving that guy a penny. This is a matter of principle and supporting our team. And we won. And I got to tell you, typically it's throw the manager under the bus, take one for the team. And that is the kind of support and teamwork at an executive level that I'm talking about. And I think more companies can do their own similar versions of that. And they will find over time, their bottom line will be positively impacted.
It's beautiful. You speak across conferences, organizations, and companies. Can you share a moment where you saw this message land, like really connect with someone who needed it?
Absolutely. I actually did a webinar on this yesterday morning for an hour for our national trade organization, 100 attendees. And, you know, I did it for the second time, the presentation at our industry does main conferences, they do law conferences, and they do a CEO of management company retreat. And there was one here in La Quinta. I'm in Palm Desert. So right up the street a few years ago, they said, we want you to reprise, your national conference presentation for these guys. And, I got about 75, 80 people in the room, which is pretty good turnout. The offshoring one had 200. So it kind of shows you the percentages where CEOs' minds are at. But anyway, we're in there and we get to the end and it's Q&A. And one lady raises her hand and said, I really appreciate you saying that not addressing this leads to suicide, because I had a suicide in my office 3 years ago and had to deal with that. And I didn't see it coming. I'm not blaming myself, but this person committed suicide in the office. So everybody showed up to work one day and there was a dead human being in the office. And another guy raised his hand and said, Bill, I'm exactly where you were. I feel like I'm right on the edge of a collapse. And I'm going to go home and talk to my wife about making some changes and what to do next. I've had some as powerful as that. I've had others that are just, man, thank you for sharing. It really, gives me courage to do what I need to do. Or I appreciate it that you emphasize spirituality in a non-denominational way. People need this, in my opinion, like they need oxygen, water, sunlight. This is a basic human need to be appreciated, to be treated right, to be in balance. And, you got Elon Musk and Trump and all kinds of people. And I'm not saying something political here, but I'm saying their management philosophies are to crack the whip. Suck it up. And that is a very old school, historical management philosophy. There's an article out there you can find on the internet called Self-Care is Not the Answer to Burnout. I forget the author's name off the top of my head, but it's a PhD level paper where the guy goes through the history of being a worker in the United States of America and how we've always put the burden of physical and mental health and wellness on the worker. I mean, think about the number of Chinese workers that died building the railroad or the Golden Gate Bridge. No one filed a wrongful death suit. We had to cope with laws and things to protect workers. And yet there's still that culture of suck it up. You have to be at your desk, crack the whip. And it's a style. It's a management style, and they think it's been effective for them, and that's fine. I think you're going to see more and more workers gravitate away from that management style and toward a more balanced perspective of their hours and how they're treated in the workplace, et cetera. I think that this is something that's begun. I think it's a huge task to change, but I go back to the statistic. If we can find $9 trillion of lost global domestic product every year, I mean, I can't even get my mind around how big a trillion is, let alone 9 of them.
Hey, go ahead. Yeah,
It's incredible, Mischa.
it's incredible. The beautiful truth. I'm looking at self-care is not the solution for burnout. Psychologist Justin D. Henderson. Yep,
That's
that's it.
him.
Perfect. It'll be
And
in the
that was
show
the
notes.
first thing I read. When I started on my quest to write that first piece, that is the first article I read. There's another on The Guardian has a fairly recent article about surgeons are committing suicide at higher than the national rate. That spoke to me because that's the AAA high performers. And a woman who had had drug addiction and had lost her medical license and had worked hard over the years to get it back, spoke at a conference of surgeons, much like I did at a conference of managers. She got a standing ovation because everybody in the room could relate personally to her experience. And, I think that The world has a lot of challenges right now, and we seem to be addressing them all in an old management way. Sun Tzu, several hundred years before Jesus was born, wrote some great management idioms in the art of war. And one of them is know your enemy. Know your enemy and yourself, and victory will never be in doubt. I don't think we know our enemy here. I really think that if we're going to solve the world's problems, whether it's between us and China or the Republicans and the Democrats or the Middle East or whatever it might be, we're using old paradigms to try and solve modern problems.
Mhm.
I'm talking about having a modern paradigm for mental health personally and mental wellness in the workplace. We cannot solve that with old philosophies. And, if I can solve this with the help of others, with myself, if I can help companies solve it, grass level up, if we can, try and approach all this stuff on a more national and global way with new paradigms, I think anything positive is possible. We keep using old methods and old paradigms, I think we're going to stay stuck in old problems.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. I want to go to a speed round. Rapid fire round. First thought, best thought. Let's go lightning round style. Ready?
Yeah,
Sunrise or sunset?
sunrise.
Favorite spiritual book?
Emmett Fox, Sermon on the Mount, not because it's religious, but because of the spiritual principles he's trying to teach.
Love it. Love that book. So powerful. A page a day keeps the doctor away. Go to mantra or phrase?
Thank you.
Love that. It's a good one. One person, alive or not, you'd love to have coffee with.
Man, this is going to sound trite. I would love to have tea with the Dalai Lama. You talk about a guy that has had to practice acceptance and perseverance. I'm going to digress for a second. Someone asked him about all the suffering of his people in Nepal and whatever. And he said, yeah, that's true. But there's a positive because our philosophy, our spiritual philosophy has now been exposed to the entire world so we can raise consciousness. That is a guy I would love to have tea with.
Amazing. What's one habit that changed your life?
I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict by nature. And I would have to say that not drinking and learning how to not drink and have a more spiritual life is a habit that changed me much for the better as a human being.
Great way to frame that. What's something people get wrong about you?
I'm an asshole. I walk into a room, I have a very big presence. I'm loud, I'm opinionated, and people can take that as arrogance and chauvinism and all kinds of things. Deep down, I just want to be like everybody else. You know, I like music, I like poetry, I like all art, I like all kinds of things. But my persona when I walk into the room is the captain of the rugby team, and not everybody likes that.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, dare to share. Let's go deeper for a sec. Not that we haven't gone deep. What's one thing you were terrified to admit about yourself, but now see as a source of power?
We've talked about it today. I was terrified to admit I was weak and needed help, that I quote unquote failed. terrified. And the minute I did it to my wife, to my doctor, and now to others, I was free. Freedom is power.
Freedom is power.
We talked about triggers before, and I had a lot of triggers. And the practice we talked about has helped me heal, and outside counseling has helped me heal so that I'm not triggered as much. I understand that part of myself much better. And, you can't make your wounds and the darkness go away. All you can do is make peace with it. And like Buddha would say, sit down and invite it to have a cup of tea with you.
We're literally making the world a better place by changing the way we react to people, by doing the things you're talking about, by reacting with a smile, compassion, forgiveness, a hug, love versus stress, chaos,
Power
opinion. Yeah,
versus
power.
power. If you read the spiritual texts and understand the stories around them, obviously Jesus had his tribulations. Growing up here, we understand those trials and tribulations. Buddha had the three great trials, and one of them was fear, right? And in the parable, Mara, the dark side of his ego, his forces shoot 1,000,000 arrows. Buddha's under the Bodhi trees about a second from enlightenment, and these arrows are coming across the river. So many arrows, it blots out the sun, right? And Buddha has a moment of fear, clutches up. Then he takes a deep breath and exhales. Says, I see you, Mara. And all the arrows turn to flowers and land all around it. And the parable means that even the Buddha, we all have fear. But our greatest fears, our greatest antagonists can be our greatest teachers. That guy I told you about that threatened me, part of me was triggered by him and I was terrified. But by the time we got to court, I'd accepted him and forgiven him. And we settled our thing and we won this other suit we had. And it was like, hello, Mr. Overton, he would say. And I would say, hello, Mr. So-and-so. And we were fine. Now, I don't think he changed all that much. I think the change was in here. I've had that experience with my wife. She used to drive me crazy, and I've shared that with you. And I could maybe call her the B word when I was mad at her. My wife's behavior, now is perfect. And, Mischa, I don't think she's changed all that.
So good. If you had 10 minutes alone with every CEO or leader in the country and no one else was listening, what would you really want to say?
People before profit, man. I think we've gotten to a spot where corporations are what's really running the country. And corporate goals are profit. And I understand that, and that's okay. That's capitalism. But I think we've gotten to a place ethically and culturally where it's gone to an extreme. And I think people before profit would be a much better way to run corporations. That would be my mission. If I had a TED Talk, that would be my mission.
Sounds like we've got a TED Talk coming.
I'd love that. I think people are dying for this message, Mischa. I mean, that's been my experience in talking about it. Field of Dreams, they will come ready for reasons they don't even understand. I can't do the great voice, but this is the same thing. People will come for reasons they don't understand because they need it. They need to be appreciated. I mean, in my industry, 70% of this are middle-aged women working as managers in this industry. So I'm an outlier. These are women whose kids are coming back home because they can't make it. They have a stressful job juggling several properties. Maybe they're taking care of their aging parents. They have their own depression, whether it's natural, they got menopausal stuff going on. I mean, and if it's 70% in my industry, what is it? What is it in other industries? I mean, this is a niche I didn't even realize was out there. I was thinking about me, right? And guys like me. And what I've learned is there are millions and millions of people and workers out there that are scattered, that are spread so thin, and they're not able to take care of themselves. Gaining weight, alcohol and drug addiction, shopaholics, whatever it might be. If we could harness this, people would live happier and healthier lives. I'm concerned about that. I keep talking about the bottom line because that's the only way I think executives right now are going to pay attention to it.
Earlier, you talked about that moment when your body said, no more. If you had your 10 everyday superpowers back then, which one would have made the biggest difference?
Well, I think I would have needed all of them. At that time, I was disconnected spiritually. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't exercising. I was working. I was trying to solve the impossible problem. If you're a Star Trek fan, I was in the Kobayashi Maru scenario, the no-win scenario. My ego chose that job. I left the prior job, which was a great job because I was, stressed out and tired of that place after 10 years. And I also had some personal things that I thought moving would help. And, the reality of this is that it compounded over time. That job wasn't the only quote unquote problem. That job was a symptom of my ego and a life of trying to climb Mount Everest professionally and personally. So I go back to every dead body on Mount Everest was once a highly motivated individual. It was cumulative. In effect, I fired my client. If I was in the place I'm now, I would have walked away from that job after 1 month.
Mm.
I just would have left quicker. I could have gone back to my old company and had a job in 30 seconds, But I was stubborn, man. I can fix anything. I'm going to show them. This is going to be my greatest triumph. It's the best thing that ever happened to me, Mischa. I mean, I needed to stop and hit a bottom and learn a different way. As some might say, I had to let go of all my old ideas.
Mm. Bill, where can people reach you if they want to bring you in to speak, connect one-on-one, or go deeper with this message? I've got an
Well, look,
email.
all that's great. Mostly I want to say, if you're in crisis, please reach out to me. If you want me to talk, that's great too. My phone number would be 858-886-6655. Probably the best way to reach me, unless you're just about to go do something crazy and hurt yourself, then call me, is Bill Overton 908@gmail.com. Send me an email. That's the best way probably to connect with me. But again, if you're in legitimate crisis, call me. There are also suicide hotlines, mental health and mental wellness hotlines out there. There are tons of resources to help people, even if you don't have any money.
Thank you for sharing your contact information so willingly. Your LinkedIn, I'll put that in the show notes as well. And that's a wrap on this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. Big thanks to Bill Overton for showing us what true leadership looks like when you combine heart, humility, and healing. If this sparked something in you, share it with someone you care about, and maybe take a moment to check in with your own mental wellness too. Until next time, stay bold and let's go speak on some podcasts. Bill, thanks for being on the show. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's belove.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.